Well, welcome again to this series of teachings on the spiritual battle, specifically on the nature of the enemy. We're looking at terms that God has applied to him, and from those terms, we're learning about this enemy of ours. The second term, a lot of people are very familiar with the name Satan. Well, Satan is not actually a name. Again, it's a title. It comes from the Greek word santana, and it means adversary. That's all it means. Now, sometimes people are familiar with the phrase the adversary, but they have not connected that term. The adversary actually is what Satan means. And so as the adversary, well, we can understand a lot about this enemy of God's just by the fact that he's called the adversary. Now, if I have an adversary, what makes a person an adversary? An adversary is someone who opposes, stands against, attempts to thwart your moves, to derail you, is always working in opposition to you. And that's exactly what he is. He's the opposer. That's another term that's been applied. But the general category of the adversary tells us that this is we can infer that he's an enemy, that he's not with God, he's opposing God, he's working against him. The devil is absolutely constantly working to stop the plans and purposes of God. We see this throughout the Old Testament. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, it talks about just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these men opposed the truth. That's really a lot of what the adversary is trying to do. He's opposing truth because God is true and what God does is truth. And so the adversary is always opposing God. Just think of this in terms of the earth. God creates the Garden of Eden, beautiful, providing for all of mankind's needs. Adam sins. He basically transfers the legal right, the dominion that Adam had over the earth. He transfers that right over to God's enemy. And we saw how previously in Matthew 4 where this enemy of God's comes to Jesus as the God of this age seeking worship. He was offering to Jesus something that he really had, the power and control over the earth. Once Satan was given dominion over the earth, what did he do with it? Take a look at a rose. That's a perfect example. God didn't make it with the thorns on it. You see this beautiful flower and then you go and you reach and you grab it and you've got thorns in it. Or it's covered in aphids or other things. There's rot on it. What Satan did is he caused, stinging insects, venomous snakes, thorns, thistles, all the other stuff because he opposes God and all of God's plans and purposes. Satan, as the adversary, did this all throughout the Old Testament in an attempt to destroy the bloodline through which Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would come. He attempted to corrupt the entire race of human beings. He has always been at work as the opposer, the adversary. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, there's a description of Satan's man, the Antichrist. He's the antithesis of what Christ is, the Antichrist is. And Paul says, don't let anyone deceive you. In 2 Corinthians 2:3, it says, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come. Talking about the day of wrath. It won't come until rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worship, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Right in that section in 2 Thessalonians, we see again the desire for worship. We see the idolatry that's involved. We see the pride of self-exaltation. And we see that he will oppose. So don't be surprised when opposition comes against you. In fact, if you're doing the things and moving forward with the plans and purposes of God, I will absolutely guarantee you, you're going to be opposed. Most people get tricked off and lured into the systems of the world. And we have to realize that Jesus Christ said that we would suffer persecution. I'm not saying that as that God wants us to have persecution, but when you're moving forward with the plans and purposes of God, when you have dedicated your heart and said, God, I want to serve you and you alone, and I will dedicate everything I have, God, all of my possessions, my life, I'm giving to you, God. Well, you better strap on your seatbelt and get ready, because opposition's going to come. A lot of times we have to learn how to endure through that opposition, how to endure through false accusations, slander, gossip, rumors, how we have to endure through physical attacks and the other things, so that we can develop a steadfastness, so that we can learn how to be patient. You know, to suffer is to learn how to endure. Without suffering, there is no endurance. Sitting in front of the television, eating popcorn, drinking beer, and having a good time watching football games, anybody can endure that. Endurance only comes when there's opposition, in the sense of that's when we have to bear up. And God desires that we strengthen ourselves. We be people of steel inner core, that we can stand against it. Think about the Apostle Paul and the opposition he came to him. He talks about being whipped with rods, whipped with whips, night and day in the ocean, in the deep, in the Mediterranean Sea, in prisons, in cold, in famine, in times of plenty and in times of lack. But through all of that, Paul learned to endure. In the Old Testament, you have Joseph, who God had revealed was great things were going to happen, and his brothers tried to kill him, threw him into a pit. Nehemiah, who tries to move forward with the plans and purposes of God, rebuilding the walls around Jerusalem. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, these men come against him, false accusation. There's nothing new about this. There's the story of a seminary president who would bring in the students, sit them down, and in the semester he'd say, hey, how you doing? How's life going? Well, most of us, you know, the fact is life isn't always perfect. We've got things we're dealing with. And this president was pretty wise, because he knew if you're really moving forward with the things of God, you're going to have some bumps and hiccups in the road. One student came in and said, hey, things are going great, getting good grades, finances are good, everything's wonderful, life couldn't be better. President sat back and looked at him and said, son, I'm really concerned. Kid goes, why are you concerned? I just told you everything's going great. President looked at him and he said, because I know how life is, and if you're really moving forward with the things of God and with what Christ wants you to do, you ought to be suffering some kind of opposition. Don't be alarmed when the enemy comes against you. He's the adversary. But also, let's not give him undue honor and praise and pretend like everything that happens in life is because of the adversary. The fact is, sometimes we do silly things, we do stupid things, and then we reap the consequences of those unwise decisions. Sometimes the book of Ecclesiastes even tells us you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So not everything that's bad in your life is because of the adversary. Let's not go to that extreme. But let's also realize that when things come against us, check yourself. If you're really moving forward with the plans and purposes of God, if you're doing what God wants, you've got an enemy out there, and he's opposing you.